All right, let's do this. We're diving deep into the world of Interpol today. Get ready. It's way more complicated than any spy movie.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know those scenes where they're swooping in, making arrests all over the globe?
Yeah, totally. Like something out of a Bond film.
It's completely different in reality.
That's what we're here to uncover.
Mm.
So we're digging into their Wikipedia page today, getting into all the nitty-gritty details.
And trust me, the truth about Interpol is way more interesting than any Hollywood fiction.
I bet. Okay, so what's the biggest misconception people have about Interpol?
People think they're this huge, powerful, global police force.
Yeah, kind of like the Avengers of law enforcement.
But the truth is, Interpol, which, by the way, stands for International Criminal Police Organization,
I did not know that.
is more of a facilitator, like a giant network. Imagine like 196 countries, all connected, sharing information about crime.
So like a massive global crime-fighting group chat.
Exactly.
Except instead of funny memes, they're sharing intel on fugitives and, like, new types of crime.
Exactly. And the amount of data they have is unbelievable. We're talking millions and millions of records.
Fingerprints, I'm guessing.
Yep. Fingerprints, DNA profiles, stolen travel documents. It's mind-blowing.
Hold on, stolen travel documents. How many are we talking about?
Just in that database alone, 12 million records.
12 million, that's insane.
Yeah, it's huge. But here's the thing. Even with all that data, all that reach, Interpol can't actually arrest anyone.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So no globe-trotting super agents.
Nope.
How does that even work?
It all boils down to this idea of international cooperation.
Cooperation.
Right. Interpol, they respect each country's laws, their sovereignty. So they can issue these things called notices. Think of them like alerts or requests
Requests for what?
for action, basically. But it's up to each country, each member country, to actually make the arrest, you know?
Okay, so it's less about them, like, swooping in and more about empowering individual countries to work together.
Exactly. They're like the ultimate support system. They connect the dots, share intel, provide expertise. But when it comes to upholding the law,
That's on each individual country.
that's right.
So no arresting powers, but
Yeah.
they can, like, coordinate during a major incident. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember that case, Operation Identify Me?
Refresh my memory.
22 women found murdered. Nobody knew who they were.
Oh, right. Tragic.
Interpol, they didn't go in, guns blazing or anything.
Which, as we now know, they can't do anyway.
Exactly. They sent in their incident response teams, the IRTs.
IRTs, okay. So those teams, they're like, what, first responders, but for international crime scenes?
Yeah, kind of. They help with everything. Identifying victims, sharing information, coordinating between different countries' police.
So they're like the glue that holds everything together during a major investigation.
That's a good way to put it. It's all about empowering those national agencies to take the lead.
Right. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
Global cooperation, but also respecting each country's autonomy.
Interesting. Okay, so before we get into how Interpol tackles specific crimes, I'm kind of curious. How did this whole organization even start? It's not like a bunch of detectives just decided to start a club one day, right?
You'd be surprised.
Mhm.
The roots of Interpol, they actually go all the way back to the early 1900s.
Wow, that long ago. What was going on back then that made them think, hey, we need an international police organization?
Well, back then, international police cooperation, it was practically non-existent.
Breaks sense.
But international travel was starting to increase, and unfortunately, so was international crime. People started realizing, hey, we need a better system for this.
Right. Makes sense. So what happened? Did they all just like get together and say, okay, let's figure out this international crime fighting thing?
Pretty
No.
much.
Really?
Yeah. Picture this. 1914, Monaco, the first International Criminal Police Congress.
It was there that the idea of Interpol really started to take shape. They talked about establishing direct contact between police forces in different countries, standardizing those forensic techniques they were developing, making extradition smoother. It was pretty groundbreaking for the time.
I bet. 1914, that's what, right before World War I?
Unfortunately, yeah. That kind of put a damper on things for a bit.
Understandably.
Yeah.
So Interpol was put on hold.
Yeah, basically. It wasn't until 1923 in Vienna that the International Criminal Police Commission, Interpol's direct ancestor, you could say, was officially born.
Vienna. Okay, so when did the U.S. join the party? We're always eager to be involved, right?
Actually, not so fast on that one.
Right.
The U.S. didn't become a member until 1938.
1938. That's surprising.
It's kind of ironic, actually, because the U.S. had tried to get a similar international police effort going back in 1922. They held this international police conference in New York City, but
Let me guess.
yeah,
Nobody showed up.
you got it. Looks like the world wasn't quite ready for the U.S. to lead the charge on global crime fighting back then.
Wow, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so Interpol's up and running, finally. Then World War II hits. I can't imagine that was good for international cooperation.
Yeah, it was a dark time for the organization. The Nazi regime actually took control of Interpol during the war. They even set up shop in the same building as the Gestapo.
Oh no, seriously?
Yeah, understandably, a lot of the member countries, they weren't too happy about that. Many of them withdrew their support.
Yeah, I wouldn't blame him.
Yeah.
So what happened after the war? Did Interpol just disappear?
Thankfully, no. After the war ended, they were able to rebrand themselves a bit. And that's how we got the Interpol we know today.
New name, new location, fresh start.
Exactly. In 1946, they officially became the International Criminal Police Organization.
So that's what ICPO stands for?
Yep. But they kept Interpol as their common name. And for their headquarters, well, they moved around a bit.
Oh yeah, where did they go?
First, they were in Paris, then they moved to St. Cloud in '67. Finally, in 1989, they settled in Lyon. That's where they still are today.
Lyon, France. Makes sense. Okay, so that's the history, kind of. They've got a fancy headquarters.
Yeah.
But what do they actually do? How do they make this whole international crime fighting thing happen?
Well, as we've talked about, it's not about sending in their own agents to make arrests. Instead, think of them more as a massive global resource hub for police forces around the world.
Resource hub. Okay, I
Mhm.
like it. What kind of resources are we talking?
Well, their database system is really their crown jewel. It's a gold mine of information. Criminals, crime trends, fingerprints, facial recognition data, DNA profiles, you name it. They've got it all.
So let's say, I don't know, a country's investigating a crime,
Yeah.
and they think there might be an international connection. They can just call up Interpol and be like, hey, can you run the suspect's fingerprints through your system?
Exactly. And Interpol can cross-reference that with data from all their other databases. They might find connections that a national agency wouldn't even think to look for.
Wow. That's amazing. It's like they can see the bigger picture that individual countries might miss. So they're not just holding all this information, they're actively analyzing it, looking for patterns, right?
Absolutely. They're constantly analyzing data, looking for trends, emerging threats. Then they share that intel with their member countries.
So they're like the watchdogs of the international crime world, making sure everyone's up to date on the latest threats. That's incredible. But with all this sensitive information flying around, how do they keep it secure? Sharing data with so many different countries, there's got to be a risk of, leaks or hacks, right?
Oh, absolutely. Data security is paramount for Interpol. They have a really sophisticated system in place. It's called the I-247 system.
Okay, I-24/7. What is that, like a super secure internet just for police?
You got it. It's a high-security encrypted communication network. Connects Interpol agents and member countries all over the world, 247, like the name suggests.
So it's like a global police intranet, but way more secure.
Exactly. It lets them collaborate in real time, access all those Interpol databases, even tap into each other's criminal databases. It's a game changer for international investigations.
That's incredible. But this all sounds so expensive. How do they pay for all of this?
It's definitely not cheap. Their annual budget is a whopping $142 million.
$142 million. Okay, where does all that money come from?
The bulk of it comes directly from the member countries themselves.
Ah, so everyone chips in. Makes sense. Are there any other sources of funding, though?
Well, before 2013, they used to partner with some private sector organizations. But those relationships, they got a bit complicated.
Oh, how so? Tell me more. Complicated. Like how complicated? Did they accidentally partner with, like, a supervillain or something?
Not quite a supervillain, but their choice of partners definitely raised some eyebrows. We're talking about groups like FIFA, the soccer organization.
FIFA, okay.
And even Philip Morris, the cigarette company. Big Tobacco.
Hold on. FIFA and Big Tobacco were funding Interpol. That seems, I don't know, kind of messed up. What were those partnerships even about?
That was part of the problem. It wasn't always clear. And that lack of transparency led to some serious concerns about conflicts of interest. People were worried these groups might be trying to influence Interpol, use them for their own agendas.
So what did Interpol do?
To their credit, they listened to the criticism, they ended those partnerships, completely overhauled their financial system, made it more transparent, more accountable.
Okay, good. Good for them. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
But let's be real. 196 countries, all working together. There's got to be some disagreements, some bumps in the road.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting and a little controversial.
Okay, I knew there had to be some drama. Hit me with it. What are the criticisms?
One of the big ones, and it's a serious one, is the potential for Interpol's system to be used for political reasons. Basically, countries trying to use Interpol to go after their enemies.
Oh, well, instead of catching criminals, they're going after, like, political rivals.
Yeah.
That's pretty dark.
It's a real concern. Remember those notices we talked about, the alerts?
Yeah.
Well, Interpol relies on requests from its member countries to issue those.
Right.
And there's not really a foolproof system to prevent a country from, well, abusing that.
So a corrupt government could, like, ask Interpol to issue a red notice that's like an international arrest warrant.
Exactly. They could issue one for someone they just didn't like, a journalist, an activist, anyone they see as a threat.
That is terrifying. And we're not just talking about hypotheticals here. This has actually happened.
It has. And the consequences for the people targeted can be devastating.
Okay, so say someone gets hit with one of these bogus red notices. What happens?
Well, they could be detained, even arrested if they travel internationally.
Just for traveling?
Yeah. Imagine you land in a foreign country for vacation or for work, and suddenly you're detained because your home country issued a red notice. All because you were critical of the government or something.
That would be a nightmare.
It would. And it's not just about the immediate situation. It can affect your whole life, your ability to travel, to work, even to seek asylum in another country if you need to. Your life could be completely upended because of these trumped-up charges.
It's so unfair. Are there, like, any safeguards in place to prevent this?
There are some, but there's been a lot of talk about strengthening them. Some experts want stronger safeguards, specifically for refugees, people fleeing persecution, to make sure they aren't unfairly targeted with these notices.
Right. That makes sense. What else can they do?
Another idea is an independent body within Interpol, like a review board.
Okay.
They'd review the red notices before they're actually issued, flag any that seem fishy, politically motivated, that kind of thing.
So like a checks and balances system.
Exactly. And some people, they're even talking about having actual penalties for countries that abuse the system. The idea is make it too risky for a country to even think about using Interpol as a weapon.
That's smart. That makes a lot of sense. It's about making sure Interpol is used for what it's supposed to be for, fighting crime, not for some political game.
Exactly. It's a tough situation finding that balance. How do you facilitate international cooperation but also protect individual rights? It's a constant challenge.
It's definitely more complicated than it seems at first glance. And speaking of things that are more complicated than they seem, you mentioned earlier that Interpol uses more than just red notices. Gotta admit, that's the only one I really knew about. Mostly from movies and TV shows, to be honest.
Most people. But yeah, red notices, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Interpol has a whole rainbow of notices. Each color means something different.
Okay, color-coded crime fighting. I like it. Break it down for me. What other colors are we talking about?
Well, there are blue notices. Those are mostly for gathering information.
Information about
A person's identity, or maybe their activities related to a crime, like if they need more information to track someone down or to figure out what exactly happened.
Okay, blue notices for intel gathering. What else?
Let's see. Green notices, those are warnings.
Warnings about...
About a person who might a threat to public safety. Like, say someone has a history of really serious crimes and they're on the move internationally. Interpol might issue a green notice to let other countries know to be on the lookout.
Okay, so a heads up to other countries. Makes sense. What's next?
We've got yellow notices. Those are specifically for missing persons.
Missing persons.
Right. Like if someone disappears and there's a chance they've crossed international borders, Interpol can issue a yellow notice. It can be a really important tool to help find them.
Oh, wow. That's actually really helpful. I could see how that would be huge in those situations. Okay, so blue, green, yellow. What other colors are in Interpol's crime-fighting crayon box?
We've also got black notices.
Okay, black notices. What are those for?
Those are used when they need help identifying a body.
Oh.
Like if they find someone and they think there might be an international connection, they might send out a black notice with a description, any identifying features, that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. That's a little darker, but I mean, I get it. Solving those cases can be really difficult. Okay, so we've got blue, green, yellow, black. Are there more?
Yeah, we're not done yet. There are also orange and purple notices.
Orange and purple. This is way more complex than I thought. Okay, so what do orange notices mean?
Orange, that's when there's a serious and imminent threat.
Imminent? Okay, so like we need to do something now kind of threat.
Exactly. A terrorist threat, a new type of weapon, maybe even a batch of contaminated food that's made its way across borders, something like that. It's basically a global be on the lookout alert.
Okay, so orange is for serious, urgent threats. Got it. What about purple?
Purple notices are all about sharing information on criminals' methods. Their MO.
Modus operandi. I've always
Yeah,
wanted to use that in a sentence. So, like, if there's a new type of scam or a hacking technique, that's popping up in multiple countries.
that's exactly it. Interpol can issue a purple notice to warn everyone, tell them what to look for, how to protect themselves, that sort of thing.
So it's about sharing knowledge, helping everyone stay one step ahead of the criminals.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So we've got blue, green, yellow, black, orange, purple. How about forgetting any colors?
You almost got them all. There's one more, and it's a big one. The UN Security Council Special Notice.
Okay, that sounds serious. The UN is involved.
It is. As you might guess, it's issued at the request of the UN Security Council, usually in relation to international sanctions.
So if the UN Security Council decides to impose sanctions on a country or even a specific person, Interpol issues one of these special notices.
That's right. And they make sure that all their member countries are aware of those sanctions and know to enforce them.
So it's like Interpol is lending its global network all its resources to help the UN enforce its decisions.
Exactly.
Wow. So we've got all these different notices, this incredible database, but do they ever take any direct action themselves, like send in their own people to solve a crime?
They can, but it's rare. And it's not like what you see in the movies with
No.
like car chases and shootouts and whatnot.
Right, right. No James Bond shenanigans. So if it's not that, what kind of direct action are we talking about?
They can deploy what they call incident response teams, or IRTs. They're made up of specialists, experts in different fields, and they can be sent anywhere in the world, really quickly, if needed.
Okay, so if there's a major incident, like a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, something that needs a lot of international coordination, Interpol can send in their A-team.
That's a good way to put it. They're there to advise, to troubleshoot, to make sure everyone's working together smoothly.
So say there's a crime that crosses a bunch of different countries, like a smuggling ring or a cyber attack. Interpol can step in and make sure everyone's on the same page. No one's dropping the ball.
Exactly. That's their specialty. Breaking down those communication barriers, offering expert advice, making sure information is shared quickly.
That's got to be so valuable in those high-pressure situations where there's a lot at stake. Okay, so on top of all that database work, they're also like boots on the ground when it really matters.
Exactly. They can help with everything from identifying victims and collecting evidence to training local law enforcement agencies. They're a really valuable resource for countries dealing with, well, with really complicated international crimes.
So to be clear, they're not just sitting back in their headquarters in Lyon, right?
Oh, no, they've gone global.
Global. Like how?
Well, think of the General Secretariat in Lyon as their home base, their command center. But they also have 7 regional bureaus.
Regional bureaus. Okay.
They're kind of like mini Interpols strategically placed around the world.
So where are they?
Let me see. There's one in Buenos Aires, covering the Americas. One in Yaoundé for Central Africa. Abidjan for West Africa. San Salvador for North America and the Caribbean. Addis Ababa for East Africa. Nairobi for Southern Africa. And one in Bangkok covering the Asia and Pacific region.
Wow, they really do cover a lot of ground. What's the point of having all those regional offices?
It's all about being closer to the action and more responsive to the needs of each region. Those regional bureaus coordinate Interpol's activities in those areas, build relationships with the local police forces, make sure everything's running smoothly.
Ah, so it's about having local expertise on a global scale.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so they've got their headquarters in Lyon, these regional bureaus around the world. Anything else?
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. They also have a few special representative offices.
Special representative offices. Now we're getting really fancy.
Well, they're strategically located to strengthen relationships with other big international organizations.
Like who?
Well, they have one in Brussels, for example. It represents Interpol to the European Union.
So like an Interpol ambassador to the EU.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
That's kind of cool. Where else do they have these representative offices?
They've got one in New York City, representing them to the United Nations, and one in Harar, Zimbabwe. That one focuses on stopping the trafficking of cultural artifacts.
Stopping art thieves. That's pretty cool.
Right, it's a big problem. And then there are Interpol's 3 command and coordination centers. Those are important. They provide support to member countries 24/7. So no matter what time it is, someone's always there to answer the call.
It's like a global 911, but for international crime fighting.
Exactly. The main one's in Lyon, but they've also got centers in Buenos Aires and Singapore, just to make sure they've got things covered no matter what.
Talk about a global network. Okay, so we've got the databases, the different notices, the regional bureaus, the specialized offices. It really seems like Interpol has thought of everything.
They've definitely built an impressive setup, that's for sure. But the thing about international crime is it's always changing, always evolving. So Interpol has to change too, adapt to stay ahead of the game.
Right. They can't just rest on their laurels, especially with things like cybercrime becoming such a huge problem. It's not like you can just arrest a computer virus, right?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Interpol is getting really serious about cybercrime.
Okay, good. Because that seems like, I don't know, a really important area for them to focus on. What are they doing about it?
One of their most interesting projects is this thing called the Interpol Global Complex for Innovation, the IGCI. It's in Singapore.
The IGCI. Okay, and what is that exactly? Okay, the IGCI, it's like their high-tech crime lab, but for cybercrime.
You got it. It's all about research and development, finding new ways to fight crime in the digital world.
So it's Interpol, but in the metaverse. Metaverse. Maybe that's not quite right. But it's with tackling things like hacking, online fraud, all that.
Exactly. Cybercrime, it doesn't really fit with those traditional law enforcement methods, so Interpol's trying to bridge that gap, developing new tools, new techniques to keep up with the criminals.
Like the cyber criminals, they raise the stakes, and then Interpol has to raise the stakes even higher.
It's a constant game of cat and mouse, and the IGCI, that's their way of making sure they stay ahead of the game.
Makes sense. So what kind of stuff have they done so far? Anything cool we should know about?
Oh, yeah. Have you heard of the SIMDA botnet?
SIMDA botnet. That sounds familiar, but refresh my memory.
The botnet is basically a huge network of computers, all infected with malware, all controlled by someone remotely.
Okay.
And they can use it for all sorts of bad stuff, stealing data, launching attacks, you name it. Well, the SIMDA botnet, it was massive, one of the biggest ever discovered. And Interpol, they played a key role in taking it down.
Wow, really? That's amazing. Okay, so they're doing good work over there at the IGCI. It sounds like it's a really important part of Interpol's future, especially with all the tech stuff, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Technology, it's not slowing down anytime soon. Neither is cybercrime. So the IGCI, it's going to be more and more important as time goes on.
For sure. But it's not just about technology, right? We talked earlier about the red notices and how there's a risk of them being abused. Is Interpol doing anything to address those concerns?
Oh, definitely. That's something they're constantly working on, reviewing the system, seeing what they can do better, making sure they get it right.
What about the balance between international cooperation and, respecting individual rights? We talked about that earlier, too. It's a tricky one.
It is. It's tough. But Interpol, they're committed to getting it right. It's about making sure they can still fight crime effectively, but also protect people, make sure the system isn't being used against them.
Right, right. It's a balancing act, for sure. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive into all things Interpol, there's one more thing I'm curious about. Their emblem. The logo.
Ah, yeah. The
Yeah.
Interpol emblem. It's pretty iconic.
It's very official looking. I like it. What's the story behind it?
Well, they adopted the current one back in 1950, and it's full of symbolism.
Okay, like what? Give me the rundown.
Okay, so you've got the globe, obviously, representing, the global reach. Then there are olive branches, which symbolize peace.
Peace,
And then there's
Yeah.
sword, which...
which represents justice.
Well, police action, technically, but close enough. And then there are scales for justice.
Okay, so globe, olive branches, sword, scales. Is that it?
Owen, we can't forget the acronyms OIPC and ICPO. That's the organization's full name, in French and in English.
Right, right. Because international cooperation, all that. Speaking of which, Interpol has a lot of member countries, right? Pretty much everyone's on board with this whole international crime fighting thing.
Pretty much. They've got 196 member countries. It's a huge network. Think about it. Police agencies from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, all working together, sharing information. It's amazing.
196 countries. That's most of the world. So who's not a member? Are there any countries that are like, nope, we're going solo on this crime fighting thing?
There are a few. North Korea, for one, and then there's Tuvalu, Kosovo, Taiwan, and Western Sahara. They're not part of Interpol for various reasons.
Interesting. I wonder why not. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a part of this global crime fighting network? It seems like a no-brainer.
Well, it can be complicated. Some of it comes down to politics, international recognition, that sort of thing. And for some countries, maybe they feel like they've got their own systems, and that's enough.
Right, right. I guess it's not always so simple. But hey, at least most of the world has come together on this. That's got to count for something, right?
It definitely does.
Well, this has been super interesting. We learned so much today, from red notices to botnets and everything in between. I have to say, Interpol is a lot more fascinated than those spy movies make them out to be.
Right. It's way more complicated than it seems on the surface, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so important. Okay, so the next time I see Interpol mentioned somewhere, I'm going to have a whole new appreciation for what they actually do, the real work behind the scenes, all the data, the coordination, the collaboration. It's amazing.
It really is.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. We've reached the end of our deep dive into Interpol. Hopefully you learned some stuff too. Big thanks to our expert for walking us through all of it.
Happy to be here.
And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us. Now, we covered a lot of ground today, but we just scratched the surface. So we want to hear from you. What do you think about Interpol's role in the world? Is this whole international crime-fighting thing even possible? Let us know. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.